Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Tina Rushing. I'm one of the co-founders of Punk Rock Saves Lives. I'm actually sitting here in a bowling alley parking lot in Fort Collins, Colorado, getting ready to work with a different nonprofit called Blast and Scraps. They do free shows for the community, and it's pretty exciting. They have Food Not Bombs here as well, and their nonprofit, they do recycled merch, so slightly used clothing. They print on themselves, which is pretty cool. And I'm really excited. But today we are talking about OCD. We have a guest. Chris, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's nice to meet you, Tina. So my name is Chris Trondsen. I'm an individual with OCD, and I struggled with severe OCD starting at a young age. It came to a head definitely around my late teens, early 20s, and it was really severe, housebound suicide attempt until I finally got treatment. And then I worked in the entertainment field after, and then decided that I wanted to turn around and kind of help people. So I kind of switched passions. And now I'm a therapist that works at the Gateway Institute in Costa Mesa, California, where I treat OCD as a therapist, as well as do a lot of advocacy. So it's been full circle for me. And I'm excited to be here and talk to everybody watching and just let them know more about the disorder and how it affects people, and that there is help and hope.
Whew, chills. So this is
Oh, okay. Tina jumped off. I think there was an internet issue, so I'm just going to take over until she pops back in. So as she was saying, my name is Chris Trondsen, and I advocate for... Oh, there she is.
There we are. Sorry about that. I am in my car,
okay.
so hopefully this doesn't happen too often, but we'll hope for the best. I have backups upon backups. But yeah, I was raised by a mom who had OCD. She was diagnosed when she was 8 years old, and she did pretty good. They did some therapy with her when she was a kid. She wasn't able to go to high school. She got her GED. She wasn't able because of her just everything. She couldn't go to college. They eventually got her on the right track. They got her on a medication that was working, and then she got pregnant with me. And at that time, she couldn't be on her medication. And actually, that would be the last time she ever was. So it was hard. I like to think that we lived in a different place, and she didn't get the help that she needed. So if something bad would happen, if something didn't work the way she needed it to work to be okay, she would throw out her insulin. She wouldn't eat. She would do a lot of things, and that actually led to her dying in 2014 from a diabetic heart attack. So I'm really thankful for what you do. I'm super excited to hear more about your story and to hear how OCD has affected you, because I never had these resources as a kid, right? So, like, I was a kid who heard her say it on the phone once, and just knew I had to do certain things in my life, and that's it. And I think awareness is so important. Thank you, Amanda. So very important to make it okay to find ways to live, right?
Well, I think, I'm so happy that you opened up and shared, is because, it is so heartbreaking, because I think one of the most difficult things with having OCD is you saw firsthand just as how much it really negatively impacted and consumed your mom's entire life. And what I think is frustrating is for those of us living with it or have a loved one living with it, when we talk about OCD to the average person, they don't understand the pain that comes with it. If somebody's really, really struggling with MS, or if somebody's really struggling with cancer, it's not that people want pity. It's just at least people are giving understanding, and people are jumping in with resources and help, and willing to fight and to provide acts of service and kindness and support, which we need when we're going through something when we're struggling with something. But especially because of the time for your mom, you're saying 2014, so there was less resources now. And when I was really struggling bad with OCD, there was little resources as well. And I think that's been the hardest thing, even to this day. Like, when I talk to people, like, this is why I feel behind, and this is why I struggled for so many of my years and lost so much time. And they always are thinking, oh, this or that. And then when I tell them it was this obsessive compulsive disorder, there's like this look of like, that's it. And it's not that I want people to jump in and cry for me or anything like that. It's just, I just want understanding. And so because there isn't a lot of understanding in medical professionals and society, people like your mom, very similar to your mom, in the sense of like OCD almost killed me. You know, there was a suicide attempt for me when I was younger because of the OCD. And I know that there's so many people who are negatively impacted by this disorder, which leaves them housebound, or unfortunately, like in the case of your mom or for my attempt, it can be deadly, it can be harmful. And so, you know, when you wrote that email to me about your mom, I just was glad that you were, I didn't want to bring it up because I wanted to let you bring it up if you wanted to, but it broke my heart in the sense that it's like, you know, now, you know, people will never fully understand, I think, unless they get education about just how much it impacted your mom. But not only did it impact your mom, it impacted you. And this is such a family disorder, and it's impacted my family as well.
Yes, I agree. And it took me a long time. When I was young, we didn't talk about it. And I think that's part of the awareness, right? It was something we just didn't talk about. And I didn't know. I didn't realize it was different. I didn't know I was growing up in a house that wasn't conventional in sort of ways. Like, we would watch Growing Pains or like Brady Bunch, and I'm like, that's not real. You know, that's not a real thing. We weren't allowed to have people in the house. For me to like do homework, I would have to come home, put all my books in the hallway, take a shower, not touch anything, wash my hands. My grandmother would then clean my books, clean the shower, like do this whole thing so I could study. So it was just such, I never said a word. Until honestly, I became an adult where I was like, I feel like this is something we should talk about, especially after losing my mom. I'm like, it's important to shed what OCD can really do. It's not just people like pens in a certain order or something like that. There's so much more to it.
Yeah. And I mean, you talking about, I mean, some of the stuff that your mom was doing, I did, unfortunately. You know, it's like when I got my own place, when I was struggling with OCD, it's like I couldn't have people over. And one of the hardest parts of this disorder was the isolation that came with it. And I know with a lot of people during the pandemic, that's what's really impacted everybody, not just people with OCD, but everybody across the board's mental health, is just the isolation that came with it. And that's how the disorder usually tends to leave us, is very isolated. So the same thing as your mom, I didn't have people over. And so if that meant giving up friendships, I was okay with it, not because I wanted to, but because the way that OCD works is it activates in the part of our brain that really struggles with safety. The part that our brain that struggles with safety is overblown, constantly just pinging. And so people coming into your home, whatever specific fear you have because of OCD, your brain just is like, this is too much. Like, get these people out. Let's control how things go. You can't sit here. If you sit here, you have to wipe it down first. And look, it may not even be contamination. There's people that struggle with intrusive thoughts about harm, and knives around them freak them out. So they can't have knives in the house or eat at restaurants with knives. So there's so many ways that the disorder negatively impacts our surroundings. And because of that, that leads to the isolation, to the struggle. And OCD, because it primarily attacks that part of our brain, obviously your mom knew that there was, like, you know, she had to take her insulin and be careful. But when OCD attacks, we'll do things that are unsafe because the disorder tells us, no, this needs to be done this way. I don't care what you're telling me. And so, you know, it leads to people not being able to take care of their well-being.
Yeah, and it's scary. It's scary that our brains can do that to us, right? Get us in a point where we throw out all of our reasoning about our own self-care and our own well-being, and we're like, nope, that doesn't matter at this point. Something else does, and you put yourself at risk. And I saw that from my entire childhood, and it's scary. It's definitely scary, and it's something I never really took thought in, truly. Like, even after she died, we got into a fight the day before, and that's a thing that I'm working through till this day, because she wanted me to forgive her for I was mad, right? Because I didn't understand. She never talked to me about it, which is why I'm really glad I'm talking to you today, and I've been researching out the wazoo since she's passed. But she never talked about it, so I never really fully understood. Even as I was 22 years old, right? Even at a somewhat adult, won't say a full adult, but a somewhat adult, I couldn't. I was angry. The anger stopped, and I was like, I will forgive you in my time. I have time. And she was like, you don't know if we do. And I was like, you're young. You're 46 years old. I've got time. And then to make sure everything else is okay for you, for OCD.
Yeah, I mean, in my story, I look back, obviously I'm at a place now with treatment and advocating, and I'm really good, and I'm in a healthy space and my life is great. But there is so much of my life that was not the case. And just like your mom, there were so many times that I gave up friendship. I didn't leave the house. I skipped meals. I did things that were just unsafe because the way that I try to describe, OCD to other people is, we have the brain that you and I are talking with right now. We're logical. We can think through clearly, but there's a part of our brain that if we almost get hit by a car, or if we're walking down an alley and we hear footsteps behind us, there's a part of our primitive brain that just jumps in and springs into action to keep us safe. The problem is with OCD, we don't go into that once or twice a month like the average person. We can go into that fear state of our brain once or twice an hour, sometimes when we're really severe, once or twice a minute. And so the brain isn't designed to primarily be in that fear state. But when we have OCD, especially not treated and not cared for, we're constantly in that fear state. And so the OCD almost demands certain things. And so when you, like in your case, when you meet somebody or know somebody with severe OCD, you're seeing them do things that feel illogical, but to the part of the brain that's being tapped into in that moment, it feels life or death. And so, there's a lot of people like myself who just skip meals, not because I wanted to, but there were so many compulsions and there's so many physical things I had to do. And there's so much going on in my head. And I was in such a fear state. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't eating well. I wasn't taking care of myself. And then that all stuff falls apart as well. So now you're isolated, you're not being healthy, and you're struggling with a disorder. And that's why when people are severe, they start to become a shell of themselves, and you stop seeing them as they once were. And that's what a lot of people said to me, is when they would see me, they're like, Chris, who are you? We don't recognize you anymore. It was such a bad position.
Sounds exhausting. Like, truly just exhausting trying to keep up. I'm not in a fear state often, but like if I have a panic attack, that like short amount of time, right, is a lot. Like I'm ready to sleep after that. I'm ready to like relax. And it sounds like you just couldn't. Like that wasn't a thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, you said it really well. After a panic attack, I mean, you're burnt out. Your body and your mind has used up so much energy. And when you have obsessive compulsive disorder, what the hard thing about it is it's cyclical. It's cycle. You think of the O in OCD. And so you get these thoughts, these feelings, these urges, these fears. And so you do either physical, mental, or both. You kind of do like a compulsive or ritualistic behavior to try to de-escalate the anxiety to feel safe. And the problem is you're doing that constantly when you're severe. I mean, I was doing 16 hours a day of physical and mental compulsions to the point that I was literally just, waking up, doing compulsions and going to sleep. And so that takes a lot of energy. It really negatively impacts you. So I was exhausted all the time. And so, I had a lot of different fears. So I had fears of a lot of mine primarily centered around health. So I was really afraid of getting cancer. I was really afraid of getting certain diseases. And so for me, I needed to keep everything around me very safe. I needed to go to doctor's appointments. I needed to take certain medications at a certain time. And even if a doctor was like, everything's fine, I would go to a different doctor and a new doctor. And I was cleaning things and, all that and researching and all this stuff. I would, if somebody sprayed like a cleaning chemical and, near me, I would run and think that I just inhaled it. And I have to figure out a way to decontaminate or I'm going to get cancer. I mean, it was just this constant state of being in that exhaustion. And so, the more you give into it, as you probably saw with your mom, the problem that happens is the more it takes, because you've now set your brain up to like, hey, anything OCD tells me, I'll do. And so you pretty much become, dedicated around the clock to doing it. And you can have those low moments where it's a little bit better, but there's a lot of more high moments when it's not better.
Yeah, I did see that. And I think that's why we got to the point where we did. You think it was 20 some years of my mom letting OCD be her main factor every day. And it makes sense that I also have like a child brain, right, when I think of like early memories, but it does seem like it got progressively worse. Like high school was hard. High school was rough in how everything would be impacted. And like the things that would happen if we didn't do something, I used to say it was like a war. It was everything shut down. It was screaming. I remember her threatening to kill my grandparents in this heated moment, and then everything would calm down, and she had no memory of those like high energy feelings, right?
Well, you made such a good point. What happens is if you think of like your daily energy in like a bucket, right? And like, on the average, if the bucket it taps out at 10, the average person might be like at a 1 or a 2 if their life is not as stressful. Maybe they had a flat tire, so it goes to a 4. But with your mom, with myself, and most people with OCD, our anxiety is already at like a 8 or a 9. And then when real life stressors come up or somebody does something that triggers the OCD, we hit our breaking point. And that's why, for a lot of us, we turn to anger, we get very mad, we threaten because we want to have people go away. And so for a lot of families, and my family included, they were constantly just tiptoeing on eggshells because they didn't want to set me off, because they were just so afraid that it would like turn to anger and have me freak out because of the OCD. And so what's difficult is like, part of my sadness is looking back to see how I treat my sister, and how I treated my parents, and how I treated like, other people around me. And obviously now that I've gotten better, I'm like, I don't even recognize that person. But for so long, I was just a very angry individual, because if you think about the average person in that feared state, they don't have the energy to like be polite and be considerate. They're so just trying to keep themselves okay. And so that's how I constantly felt. And I'm sure that's constantly how your mom felt as well.
Yeah, I appreciate you describing it more, because like I feel it's an interesting conversation to have someone who I only know I only know being a loved one, right? But you actually have those feelings. It's nice to hear. I even went down TikTok. TikTok is a crazy, wonderful thing, but there's a bunch of people with OCD talking about what their thoughts are and like what their feelings are to get awareness, and that was useful for me at the beginning to like go, that's where her brain was and not like how I think, right? It's a different process.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's I what I'm hearing in your story, and what has really changed my family's story life, is that education. And so as my mom and I have done a lot of advocacy together. We run a family and loved one support group that's free every second Saturday of the month. We've done talks together. We've been a keynote speaker. She talks a lot about as like a parent, with a child, with a child with OCD, and that's been healing for us, is just recognizing like I was not mentally clear and sound. We were not understanding what it is. And I think that's why it's so important for awareness, because I look at my own situation. I mean, I started showing signs of OCD when I was a small child. And then it became really, really bad in high school, to the point that I almost didn't graduate. Had so many tardies and so many absences because I couldn't get to school because of the OCD. I was super fortunate that I had a counselor that was retiring that year and kind of was like, I'll sign you off, So I don't even remember his name, but I owe him a fruit basket or something. But it just got to a point where it was, it spiraled, and it got to a point where there's a lot of depression and panic attacks and anxiety and isolation. And the whole reason my suicide attempt came about is because I didn't have an understanding about what was going on in my head. And to me, I'm like, am I just hot wired different? Do I have like a deficiency in my brain? Like I was really confused and just didn't see a way out. And so I think about it for most people that have been negatively impacted. We just want there to be understanding. And it's not only so society has some empathy and some support for us, it's also because so much medical personnel don't know how to treat it. They don't know how to diagnose it. They misdiagnose it. They're susceptible to hearing stories about OCD being like a fun way to line up your pantry, just like the rest of us. And so if you're going to a doctor and you're like, look, I'm really struggling with OCD, the doctor isn't going to take it as serious. And so then people leave the appointment not taking it as serious, and then suffer alone. And so that's why it's so important. I think back to my own story and my sad little, when I was 18, 19, spending hours and hours and hours by myself in a house doing these compulsive rituals like rewashing clothes, checking rooms. Like I had certain stuff with numbers, so I had to go to bed at a certain time, or else something bad would happen. Like overthinking and so much fear, worrying that I was having different diseases, all of those things. It constantly makes me feel like, man, I wish that like teenager or young adult would have had the resources, because it put me through so much unnecessary pain. And that's what's so hard to like walk away from today, is because it's like, man, I look back and there's so many years that so many different therapists, medical personnel, and just society in general and stigma failed me, and it fails a lot of us.
It does. I actually have experienced it myself when I started going to therapy for my first time. My very first therapist, I explained my childhood, and her response like was so negative to me, right? Like she didn't understand. She was like, she cried. First off, that was very off-putting for me as a very first time in therapy. And she went right for my grandparents, saying that they should have done something to like protect you, and I should like really focus on that. And I was like, nope.
Yeah. Well, and your experience is so common. I mean, I'm a therapist now, but when I was going through my own treatment, I mean, after I came to my, I had to get hospitalized after I attempted suicide. I had to move in with my family, and I sat there with my mom to look for help. And I remember, just probably like you experienced, it's like I went through so many therapists that didn't know how to help. And either they said they knew how to help, or they're like, let's try. And it was a lot of just talking, or what you experience, like that, let's talk about your childhood, or let's talk about blame, or why did your parents do this, so because you grew up with this, and and all of those different factors. And I was like, I don't think that's it. I really don't, because there, yeah, my life growing up wasn't picture perfect. I had a lot of stuff go on, but so have other people, and they don't do the things that I do, and I really need somebody to get that. And I remember for me, finally, what ended up happening is we got to a point where I sat with my mom. I'm like, I don't think I can do this anymore. You've sent me to therapists, sent me to doctors, psychiatrists, like they don't seem to know what's going on. I cannot live like this. Like, I'm done. I'm tapped out. And my mom was lucky enough to find the International OCD Foundation online. And when I got in front of somebody who specialized in OCD treatment, they started listing OCD. And I was thinking, man, this woman must have been hiding in my bushes, because there is no way she knows all this unless she's like spying on me. And when I finally found out, like, it's obsessive compulsive disorder, and it's not just like sanitizing your hands, it's all these different elements, and it affects people all these different ways. It was like, oh my God, this is it. Like, it finally makes sense. It gives me hope. And so when I worked with someone and sat across someone who absolutely got it, it was such a difference. Like Sean is saying in the comments, Sean O'Rourke, it's like you finally start to feel like, oh my God, like somebody gets me. And so as I started to get better, and then eventually get to a point where I was okay enough to get to really go out there and like meet other people, because I even through treatment, I was still isolated. I only left my house to go to treatment. But as I got better and joined the OCD community and met other people with it, it finally felt like home. I was like, these people get it. And it was so refreshing. But I wish that the small world of people that get it keeps expanding more and more, so we can continue to get services to people who need it.
I agree. I was excited to see that it existed. So like my first like Google search, as an adult and everything, of me looking up OCD, it's one of the first things that I saw. And the moment I was able to connect with, there's so much more, and there's people out there advocating and there to really help people. It made me feel so much better that this exists, that there's something out there, since it does seem like misdiagnosis is high.
Absolutely. Misdiagnosis is so high. I mean, when I went back and I became a therapist and I went to school for it, my thesis was all about OCD. And it turns out that the number one people most people go to in medical profession to get help for OCD is like a general practitioner, so their common doctor. And when they did research and studies, they found on average 60 to 70% of the time, those general practitioners were misdiagnosing OCD as something else. They were seeing it as ADHD because the person would struggle to focus, but it was because they're dealing with intrusive thoughts, not because they have ADHD. Or people were misdiagnosed as Tourette's if they had kind of movements and behaviors for compulsions. Some were misdiagnosed with schizophrenia because they would come in and say, look, I'm getting these thoughts to, tap my steering wheel 6 times because I don't want to hit somebody with my car. Oh, that's, so there's all schizophrenia, you're hearing voices. There's all these misdiagnoses. So I think about that. And this was a recent study. So everybody out there struggling walks into a medical professional and are getting misdiagnosed 60 to 70% of the time. Now, the good news is a lot more people are going to psychiatrists versus their general practitioner. But the problem is psychiatrists are really good at prescribing medication. But because this is such a behavioral disorder, there has to be that treatment, that therapy, that behavioral therapy component, what we call exposure and response prevention. And so 2/3 of the time, they're not recommending that because they don't know about it. So I think of the average person has to navigate misdiagnosis or just medication with no behavioral change. And only a slight sliver is finally getting the help that they need. And I think that for your mom, for me, for all these other people, it's going to be a game changer the more we can get the word out. So somebody gets, starts to see these signs and symptoms is like, I'm going to find, a psychiatrist that really knows it. And I'm going to find a therapist who specializes in the behavioral treatment for OCD. And that's the gold standard I need to really get better. And if we can streamline it, the studies still show that it takes from first symptomology of OCD, it takes people on average 14 to 17 years before they finally get the proper diagnosis and help. Could you imagine going through cancer, going through diabetes, or going through any other condition for 14 to 17 years without a proper diagnosis? It's almost unheard of. And that's what we deal with.
And it's such a crazy, like, honestly, my whole, like, I got sad in that exact moment, right? Because it's crazy to me that something that so many people can experience has that kind of lag time when other people can get for anything physical or even just some of your common mental health things can get treated quicker. And then OCD, which everyone knows the acronym. They might not understand what it means, but everyone can say OCD at one point in their life. And we still have that 14, 15 some years difference.
Yeah, exactly. I look back at as a child. I mean, I really struggled with OCD, and some of the stuff that would happen is like I'd get a thought in my head, and it'd be like a scary thought or a thought I didn't like, and I'd want to make it go away, and the OCD would say nonsensical things that I'd have to do to make it go away, and so I'd have to do these things. And often it would be in class or it would be in daycare, and I was always sort of labeled this difficult child. And I remember growing up with this difficult child label and always feeling down about my own self as a kid. Really sad, but it was never like I wanted to do these things. I felt compelled to do it or else. And so I would get stuck on homework and not be able to turn it in, or I'd get stuck when reading and having to reread stuff, and just all these different behaviors that OCD impacted my life. And it was constantly, people complaining to my parents and complaining in teacher conferences and stuff. It's just like, your son is difficult, he doesn't listen, etc. And I'm sitting there, wanting to follow rules and wanting to behave, but just felt so conflicted in my head. And I think back to like, man, if we got to a point where, one good thing about autism and ADHD is more and more teachers are recognizing it, daycare professionals, and people are getting help earlier. And it doesn't seem to be the case for OCD, even though we're getting more general knowledge of it. Teachers are being trained. My sister was a kindergarten teacher. They're being trained in how to identify ADHD and autism. The OCD component is completely missing. And I think back to all the things I did growing up. Some teacher, if they had the knowledge, could have streamlined my whole process many, many years before I finally got help, and had said, look, I think your son might have OCD. Let's get him help. So that's part of the reason that I advocate too, is I just think back to like how troubling childhood was, especially in high school. I mean, that's when it got the worst, and high school is already difficult enough. You don't want a mental health disorder.
No, that sounds like it just adds, because high school was a mess, right? We're growing, we're teenagers, we have different everything is just a mess.
Yes.
So I can't imagine. And so was it just like steadily getting more difficult as you were growing up?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think that I managed it until about junior year of high school. I was 16. And so the way that it actually first started is there's a subtype of OCD I did not even know existed until I finally started getting help. And actually, it was more when I started advocating. So there's a subtype of OCD that we title it relationship OCD, and it's where we really fixate on our relationships. And so every high schooler cares about their friendships, but I had this just obsessional worry that I was going to show up to school one day and everybody was going to hate me, no longer be my friend, and I was going to be abandoned. That was like a big core fear I had. And so an example of something I would do is I'd go to a party on like a Friday or Saturday night, and before I left, OCD would tell me you have to have one positive interaction with everybody at the party, so you end on a good note, and then you go home and it guarantees that they're going to be your friends when you go to school on Monday. And so nobody liked to go to parties with me because they're like, oh great, Chris is going to say goodbye, it's going to take him like an hour. But I felt compelled to do it because it was like this need to make sure that we were on good terms. So it definitely impacted me like that first, and it was really troublesome because I wouldn't sleep at times. I remember, when it was time to go back to school, there were some friends I didn't see over the summer for whatever reason. They might be traveling with their families, or so I was just like sick to my stomach. What if I go to school and people don't want to be my friend anymore? So that's how it really like started in high school, to get to a point that it was noticeably difficult. It also had things that I didn't want to do to like fit in and stuff like that. But I would say more of the traditional symptoms that people recognize is, my junior year, I'd done something to really anger my mom. And so I knew I was going to get grounded when she got home from work. And so as like a nice thing, I started cleaning the house, and something snapped in my head, and I was cleaning like corners and I was cleaning things. And it just so happened like around the same time I saw a news special on like toxic mold, and there's some homes that were in a track a few down from my mom's house where they were ripping over the walls and showing that there was like this toxic mold in the house and in the walls, and people were having to move out and they were getting sick. Well, at this time I started taking long showers, and so slight mold was getting in the vents because I was just taking these long hot showers. So in my brain I was freaking out that we had toxic mold, so I would spray stuff with bleach or like hold my breath. And so as soon as I graduated and was old enough to move out, I left my mom's house, not because I didn't want to live with her, but because I thought there was this toxic mold killing me. And so because I gave into that, when I moved in with my first roommate, then I started thinking that the water was poisoned because it was cloudy water. It was like hard water. So I thought, oh, this isn't safe to drink. This isn't safe to shower in. So, now my mom had fixed the mold stuff because I had moved out, but I was sneaking in her house when she was at work to shower and bathe there because I was afraid of our water. And then, so then I convinced my roommate to move. And then in the new house, they had just done a new garden and they used fertilizer. And I was thinking, oh, I'm going to inhale that and get sick. So it was just like, it just kept catapulting. And it got to a point where, like I said, I was buying new clothes each day because I couldn't wash clothes well enough, and I was throwing things away after one usage, and I wasn't eating and I wasn't sleeping. And so it all just started to combine. I quit school, I quit friends, I just dropped off of the face of the earth, stopped going to family events. And then the depression, of course, sank in, the panic attacks, the anxiety, all of that. So, my 21-year-old self who basically didn't leave the house for like 3 years except to get basic supplies at a 24-hour Ralph's, I was just gone. I mean, I was just depressed and checked out. And so that was really when it hit the breaking point, and when the suicide attempt happened, is because it was just like the isolation and everything falling apart. And like you said, and probably what you saw in your mom, I didn't see a way out. It wasn't getting better. It wasn't something I was going to grow out of. And I would always tell myself, if I can just do these things, I can finally be done. Well, I'd do that, and OCD would demand more and more and more. And at that point, I had no more to give. I pretty much was dedicating to compulsions and intrusive thoughts all day, every day. The other thing I want to add real quick is with OCD, we get very intrusive thoughts. Our brain gets stuck. So let's say you watch a horror movie, and in the scene, the mom snaps and harms her child. It's like, for us with OCD, that thought sticks with us a lot more vividly than the average person. And we start questioning it. Like, would I ever just snap and start hurting people? I would never want to do that. Okay, I'm going to avoid children because I don't want to snap and harm them. I know I wouldn't do it, but I'm really afraid. So our brains get stuck on things that we see in our environment and as well. So it's just all that was going on. I was undiagnosed. We didn't know what it was. And it was just hell for a huge chunk of my life, for sure.
Yeah, you said a lot of things that I remember seeing. I remember my mom, when she would throw out, she would do the garbage run. That was her thing. We weren't able to do it, but she would throw out her entire clothes in that process. Like, those clothes were done. They could not exist again. And it was that whole, I feel, you kind of said it like the progression. You let one thing in, and OCD's like, cool, now let's do this. And let's do this.
Absolutely. And it doesn't stop. And Yeah, for me, I just wanted relief. And so in my own story, I attempted suicide, and I was very fortunate. My roommate at the time, we worked different schedules. And so I knew she was at work, and I no longer worked at that point. I'd quit working. I was fortunate that I started working at 15 and I had savings, and also a family member had passed and it didn't leave me like a lot of money. I think it was something like $3,000, and it was enough to survive. I wasn't spending money on other fun things. So it was really just all going to like cleaning supplies and basic necessities. But I had gotten to a point where my money was running out. I didn't see an out. I didn't see anything changing. And the only thing that made sense to me was suicide. And so I had seen the movie The Client, which I think it's Tom Cruise in it, but it's in the very beginning scene, somebody like plugs up their car, runs their car, and dies from exhaust. So that was my out. And my roommate, who like never missed work, like came home, and we didn't use the garage, and my car's in the garage and my seat is back and I'm running. So she really like jumped in. That's when, I checked myself into the hospital. Like, she's like, you need to go get help. What's going on? I'm not a good liar. So the doctor quickly kind of read between the lines. I was trying to say, oh, I fell asleep in my car. And, he kind of saw between the lines. So I got help and everything. And he was like, look, you need to move in with family. You need people around you 24/7. This is unsafe. And I moved in with my family. But the thing is, it just made it worse, because now my brain said, well, look, you inhaled exhaust from a car. It's a matter of time. You're going to get cancer. That's more brutal. Like, it just, nothing stops. It just, there was no relief. And I think that's what's hardest about OCD, and I'll take a step back and say any mental health disorder, is that there is no relief from your own brain. People that have PTSD, people that have bipolar disorder, all this stuff, it's like your brain. It's with you 24/7. You're always using it. If you have a bad ankle or a bad knee or something, you're going to feel it if you're trying to run track, but it's not constant like it is with mental health. And so that's really how I got to my lowest point, is it just felt like there was never going to be an off button or a stop. And anybody with OCD can attest. It's like you just don't have the fight anymore. You're just done. And that's how I'd gotten at my worst.
Yeah, I feel that. I feel it, and knowing someone who I felt that, right? And a lot of hers, towards, since she did have treatment when she was a kid. That was like the one good thing, is they diagnosed her young, and they diagnosed her with OCD
Which is
young.
great. Yeah.
Which is great. And they did, like what you said, like an immersion therapy with her to like get her through. My grandfather would say this until the day he died, that she was her best self when they were going weekly. And at that time, and my mom was born in 1966, so therapy is different in different ways, but they literally just had her take a garbage can from one end of the room to the other once a week in her therapy, and she was doing good. She was proactive, and she was able to be engaged, and it was easier for her to go to school. So it does, when you can actually get diagnosed, it works.
Exactly. And just what you talked about with your mom, I mean, that's what we call like an exposure. And so the idea behind OCD treatment is exposure and response prevention. So in her case, carrying a trash can was a trigger for her. So it was her being brave and really facing that fear. And then the response prevention would be making sure she didn't like bolt to wash her hands or reverse what she just did. And absolutely, I mean, when people are consistent with therapy, they do a lot better. And what's so difficult is, like I've obstructive sleep apnea. And so for me, it's like when somebody was like, hey, Chris, I was actually on a road trip to San Francisco, and a friend of mine was like, shook me awake and was like, you just sound like you're choking in your sleep. Long story short, I was able to go to a doctor, say, hey, this is what I'm experiencing. Oh, that's obstructive sleep apnea. Here's a sleep doctor. Went, sleep study, got diagnosed, got a CPAP, boom. And that was such a quick process. And that's how it should be with mental health. Specifically in this case, OCD, is somebody should be able to go to any mental health professional or anybody like a counselor or teacher or something and say, hey, I'm doing these things, get, the treatment and stuff. I would say what's also difficult about OCD, and probably what your mom experienced, is a lot of times when we give into it, our brain rewards us. And the reason for that is because anytime we keep ourselves safe, which is sort of one of like, our brain's number one jobs is to make sure that we're safe, our brain rewards us. It gives us feel good chemicals in our brain. Is like, awesome, you kept yourself safe, you kept your family safe. And so that's why sometimes you need that external and it kind of like intervention from loved ones to say, look, like your lifestyle has gone downhill, you need to get help. And as we push back against it, sure, in the beginning it's really scary, but after a while we start to get our lives back and really want that. What I always think about are individuals like you, Tina, is like people who are children, because you don't have the same power dynamic as a parent pushing their kid into therapy. And so one of the things I always think about is like as children is like looking at somebody going through OCD and knowing that they need help, but feeling like you can't go to your own mom and be like, hey, go get help. It's really, really hard to do. And so, one of the studies that I read for my thesis is, people wanting to go to therapy and getting better from OCD isn't even in the top 5 reasons people go. Number 1 is they hit so rock bottom that they feel like there's no way out. And number 2 is friends and family kind of, helping them get into treatment. So additionally, not only do we need to educate people and doctors, but we need to educate friends and family and loved ones so that they can start to recognize like, hey, that sounds like my mom, or that sounds like my neighbor or my cousin. Like, I'm going to approach them with some education and hope that they're interested enough to get help, because that's a key component as well.
Yeah, I think it shows that you are thriving now. I mean, you're doing something to make a difference. You're helping others that you feel, right? And then in the other half, someone who didn't get help. My mom, it became her identity. I remember as a kid, that would be her biggest thing, is we would like talk about it, and it would be, you're trying to change me, you don't like who I am. And that would be like the dead stop. And we tried, like we pushed, but I don't think we pushed right. Obviously I was young, and my grandfather had a very very hot head when he was done with the moment of what he was doing. So she went to multiple, they committed her a couple times. And I think that the force of it, she never wanted to go do it for herself, because it happened, I think, 3 times in my life where police came. It was the whole ordeal. And then it was never again. Like, it just shut down the possibility of help.
Absolutely. And one of the hard things too about all mental health, but OCD as well, is that because it comes internal, a lot of times it doesn't feel like it's this outside thing. Like, you don't hear people walk around and say like, oh, my cancer, or like, like my autoimmune disease. People will say like, oh, I have an autoimmune disease. But a lot of times people identify with the OCD because, once again, it's the part of our brain keeping us safe. It's just way malfunctioning. It's going off with false alarms when it doesn't need to. Or if it is a genuine concern, it's just going off too frequent. So a lot of times people do feel like family members and friends and others are attacking them as a person. And so that's one of the difficult components too, is how do you approach a family member, specifically somebody who's an adult who feels like, hey, I kind of got my life together, leave me alone, and express to them like, hey, we are looking and seeing just how much it's impacting your life and everybody else's life. We really think you need help. And so that's one of the difficult parts of trying to get people to get help, is that a lot of times it feels almost like a personal attack, even if that's the most far from the truth. So in my case, when I went to my mom, like the studies show, is like I was at such a rock bottom. I mean, I was so checked out from life. I couldn't care less what was going on at that point. And that's how I was open to it. But I wonder, I think maybe if I would have gotten intervention like your mom at a very young child age, where we still say yes to our parents about everything. Oh, I'm sure. But I mean, I don't know if from like 14 to like 20, I mean, when it was really bad, I don't know if somebody would approach me to try to give me help when I was a teenager who thought I knew it all, if I would have been open to it. So that's what's difficult too, is sometimes people aren't in a place to be open or accept help. Now, if we can continue to stomp out stigma for mental health, and we can normalize it, and we can have people more open about it, sure, people are much more likely to get help. We see that in addiction. People are much more likely to get help with addiction now than they were in the 1950s and the 1970s, because we're so open about it. We've had celebrities come out about it. We've had celebrities, treatment centers be named after celebrities. We have friends and families that go. We have AA. We have all these great things. But with mental health and OCD, which is so misunderstood and I would say minimized by society, I think that when people have it, they think, oh, I can't go get help for something like that. I should just be stronger. I should push back. So it's difficult. There's a lot of complex layers to really get people the help that they need.
Yeah, I do think a lot of it is like awareness and ending the stigma. I know you commented on Instagram, but someone was like, "This sounds like me," and I don't know where to even start. To like, how do you get diagnosed, or how? And that's common. I feel it's those steps because no one really knows what you do, and then the internet is so vast. How do you even figure out what steps to do for yourself, let alone for someone you love?
Yeah, I always direct people to the International OCD Foundation. Their website is iocdf.org. So I for international and then OCD and then F for foundation.org. The reason I love it, it's a nonprofit. So they're not coming in with any biases. They're not trying to direct somebody here or there. And they have a really good search engine. So it's under the find help key that's like on the beginning. And that's literally how my mom found my therapist. And so what's nice about that is there are people on that list who specifically work with OCD, and in their description under that help page, it's going to talk about like how long have they worked for OCD, what is their background, their education, have they gotten to specific training for OCD, what percentage of their clients, and so that's a good way to start. Now, with the pandemic, there's not a lot of good that's come out of it, but the one good thing that's come out of it is telehealth has been so much more advanced. So I know people in certain countries and states can't even find a specialist in their areas, but with telehealth now, somebody can access, telecare for OCD and for other related disorders this way virtually, like you and I are speaking now. And that's
Right.
now addressed like more of the population being able to get help. So I would definitely always direct people to a specialist, because in school you get 5 to 10 minutes in undergrad and 15 minutes in graduate school on OCD, because they're trying to train you in every disorder under the sun. And so people have to really go additional training for it, either working at an OCD treating center hands-on, going to do a behavioral therapist. There's a behavioral therapy treatment institute known as the BTTI that therapists can go to and get training. So there's all these specific ways that people can get help. And in order to do that, you want to find somebody that's versed in it. And I always tell people, it's kind of like, if you had a broken foot, you wouldn't go to an eyes, nose, and throat doctor, so you want to find that specialist therapist who knows it. They'll be able to do an assessment like I got when I was going through treatment, where literally you'll know as an individual if you have OCD, because as they're doing the assessment, you're like, yes, 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 yes. And the good thing is, if it's no, 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 then hey, I don't have OCD. I may have something else, but that assessment is essential to really rule out what you're dealing with for sure.
Yeah, I appreciate that because that's when I've been posting that you're coming on. That's been my biggest thing. People have reaching out is I don't know where to start. I don't know where to look. And you just never know. There's so many things out there. Is a tool actually helpful, right? You're looking at it, you're like, this looks great, but is it actually going to get me to where I need, or am I going to waste my time? Because I know that's doing mental health, and we're big on, obviously, in mental health aspects for Punk Rock Saves Lives. That's their biggest thing, is so many people talk about the process.
Absolutely. It is a process. And that's why I like the IOCDF. I know that Richard said he's checking out the website now. There's a lot of good stuff. I'm vice president of the IOCDF Southern California chapter here in Southern California. And so we throw a big conference each year. Usually it's in person, and we get about 400, 500 people, but we've been turning it virtual during the pandemic. And so last year we had about 1,100 people attend virtually. And so we have that coming up April 30th. So I can send you that information, but it's going to be virtual. It's all day, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. West Coast time, Pacific Standard Time on Saturday, April 30th. And if people go to OCDSocal.org. So OCD like OCD and then SoCal.org. We opened registration. It's $20 to just attend an all-day conference. We get some of the top speakers in the country. And then at the IOCDF, they have an in-person conference that's going to be in Colorado in July. It's going to be in Denver, and then they have a virtual one in October as well. And so the good thing is, like, we're getting more conferences so people could come. There's talks for people with OCD, their family members, their loved ones. There's continuing education credits for therapists that want to learn more about OCD. So my hope is, as we continue to expand resources and services, it's going to be easier for people to get diagnosed. My hope is that general doctors, what they're designed to be there for is, unless somebody's coming in for those basic things, they should have resources to get people to specialists. So my hope is, as we continue, I know as an advocate, I've spoken to schools, I've spoken to hospitals, I've spoken to doctors and psychiatrists, and the more those doctors that are frontline can know about specialty treatment and direct people to those different centers and different treatment places that specialize in OCD, then more people are going to shorten that process. Because like you were saying, it's like it's such a long process, and if along the way you're getting incorrect care, it can deflate your energy towards it and your motivation for sure.
Yeah, I really appreciate all of that information right there. I feel for anyone who's interested, there's opportunities to learn more. And especially with the more I've been trying to open up, I've been trying to do better about sharing what it was like for me, so people can look and be like, I want to, you know what I mean? I want to try. We have the resources now. We have these great opportunities. One of the first things I ever saw was the International OCD Foundation had a conference, and I was like, that's something I think I should do. Like, I should go and just learn, because it's what better way to learn than with a bunch of people.
Exactly. And that's what's so great about all this stuff is not only is the education important, but I'm so big on community, because I felt like so alone. I mean, I look back to my high school self. I was so alone, even when I was surrounded by people, because I was going through so much, and it turned into other stuff. I mean, I turned to alcohol, I turned into drugs. I mean, I'm lucky I never got into like heavy drugs, but I was doing psychedelics, I was doing smoking marijuana, I was drinking, because I just wanted my brain to shut up and I wanted to stop. And so I put myself through so much because I didn't know how to get better. And so that's why it's so important, is because, you know, if people don't know there's a community out there, you're going to feel alone and you're going to feel lost. And it's already difficult going through anything alone. And so when we look at research, it shows that when people are going through cancer treatment or people are going through mental health treatment, if they can find a support group, if they can find a community, their mood and, you know, and their willingness to stick with treatment is so much higher, because they're doing it with others. And so we're social creatures, we're designed to be that. So I think for me too, the community was so huge. Just meeting other people with OCD and hearing stories just like mine, and realizing like, oh my God, there's somebody out there that gets it. You know, my grandfather was a hoarder, and hoarding disorder currently is considered an OCD related disorder. So we think of it like a first cousin. And so, I mean, I remember, you know, just my mom and my aunts and me, when I'd go over there, just seeing the house of just so much, and just realizing like, you know, hoarding disorder even has so much stigma. Like, you know, people didn't realize that it was to the point where it was like slam the house. There's all this stuff going on. So there's so many other, you know, mental health disorders that the more that we can get people a community, they can recognize that they're not alone.
You actually hit the nail like right on the head of why I wanted to do this, and why I do so much for mental health in general, is it's community based, because I felt alone. I'm sure my mom felt alone in what she was going through and all of everything, and I felt very segregated as a kid, to the point where my oldest cousin, and I still remember this to this day, my yaya was my mom's biggest advocate.
Wait, what did you say?
My yaya?
Are you Greek?
I am Greek.
I'm Greek.
That's amazing.
I'm half Norwegian. That's the last name, Trondsen, but I'm half Greek, Kalamiris. And so I have my Yaya and Papu. And so when you said that, I was like, wait, only I know Yaya.
Yes. Yep, I have my Yaya. Her family's from Hios. And she was my mom's biggest advocate for everything. And when she was passing, my mom never left her side. She was at the hospital the entire time. And I remember my oldest cousin took me into, and we're like adults. My grandmother and my mom died a year apart.
That's hard.
And I think that was my yaya was my mom's biggest support system. So at that point, it kind of like how you said you hit rock bottom. I think that's where everything went because it was harder for her. My pap did not have that nurturing side with my mom and like helping her. But my oldest cousin, she apologized to me and said she was sorry for abandoning me when I was a kid, and that she just followed what the adults were doing. And that was the first moment I had any idea anyone knew.
Absolutely. And that's what's hard too, is because like a lot of times when adults don't know what to do, I remember in the family support group that I run, some people were talking about like their teenagers and not taking it seriously and not wanting to get treatment, and they were scared. And I remember we had a 14-year-old stand up and he said, look, I didn't take it seriously until my mom did. And once my mom took it seriously, I realized like this was a problem. And so that's one of the things, a lot of times when family and loved ones are like, what can I do to help? It's like when you treat it seriously, when you treat it like it's a real condition, kids, other people will follow suit. One thing that Jeremy said in the comments that is so true is like when we have shows like Monk, and I'll never forget, I was watching I think it was Dr. Phil show. They were doing a show on OCD, and one of the audience members said, I wish I could have a little OCD so I could finally keep my house clean. And everybody kind of laughed and clapped. So when we have shows like Monk and other stereotypical shows, and we have people make comments like that, that's part of the reason that people may have OCD but think they don't. I mean, that's a whole nother reason people go so long misdiagnosed, is because they hear the stereotypes or see them in TV and movies and think like, oh, that's not me at all. Or you had Khloe Kardashian come out with Clo-CD, where she loves to organize her closet and it's just like making money off of it and laughing and smiling, and people who are really living with OCD aren't laughing and smiling. So that's part of the disconnect too. So in this case, Jeremy's talking about just making sure that he listen to a podcast, and it was like, wait a second, I think I have OCD based on this list. It's like, as we get more and more proper information, then people start to recognize like, wait a second, I do have that. I didn't know that that's what OCD is. I always thought it was Monk or something funny or quirky. And so that's why it's negatively impacting as well. And so I think as society and as people take it more seriously, more people are going to get the help and care they need. And that's why I advocate tirelessly for people like you, for your mom, for my younger self, for my family, and all those other people suffering. It's just so that my dream is like one day, mental health is treated with the same just urgency and respect and science that physical health is. That would be my dream for sure.
I could not agree more. I always say it all the time. Like you said it earlier, if you hurt your arm, you're cut your arm, or your arm is gone. You don't just go, okay, I'm going to continue my day. I'm just going to, well, my husband grew up in the time where they would say, like, you just rub dirt in it, right? I'm just going to rub dirt in this major issue and continue my day. It really does. It needs to become, you go do these things, and even just like checkups, right? Like we are told that we're supposed to go to a doctor regularly. Granted, a lot of us don't do that. But we're supposed to make sure, like, check that we're doing all right.
Absolutely. And we don't get that with mental health. Nobody ever says like, hey, I'm going to make an appointment with a therapist. I think all is good, but I just want to kind of meet with somebody and talk. And I look at it like after this pandemic as well, there's going to be so many people whose mental health were absolutely destroyed from it. So there's so much that needs to change with mental health. And I don't know why. I mean, what happened is like right after my treatment, I had a autoimmune disease that I got as a child, and I already had it, but it laid dormant for most of my life, and it came back with like raging once I was done with OCD treatment. So I got hit with that. But I remember like when I told people, like, oh, what's been going on in your life? And I would talk about the OCD and it was like crickets. And then when I would say, plus, I unfortunately was diagnosed with autoimmune disease as a child, and it remains dormant in something like 95% of humans. But of course, I'm, of the 5%, it's really hitting me hard. And it's like, people were like, oh my God, can we do anything? Blah, blah, blah. And I remember there's a woman who I'm close with who has a son with OCD. And I guess on her neighborhood, there was somebody going through cancer treatment, and she loved lasagna, and like people in the neighborhood were cooking her lasagna and dropping it off on her, on her doorstep, as they should. I love that story. then when her son was going through very severe OCD, having to be hospitalized, going into residential programs, I remember her saying, like, where's my lasagna? It's like, I would love this community support because I'm really struggling. And so if we can get that same, like resources to things with like physical ailments or other medical conditions, if we can do that with OCD and other mental health disorders, so many people are going to not feel like they're fighting this alone. So that's why I'm really appreciative of this today, is I just want people to know that they're not alone, and there's community out there, and there's people that get it, and there's people that live with it. And even if we don't see it on social media and talked about as much as it should, we are out there and there's a community for them.
Sorry about that.
Say that again. Sorry, you froze for a second.
I can't hear anything at the moment.
Oh, no. Can you hear me okay, or it muted?
I don't understand. Give me 1 second.
Of course. Absolutely. While Tina jumped off for a second, I do want to say thank you to everybody that's been joining us so far. I'll let Tina take over as soon as she comes back on, but I really appreciate it. It's great to see the comments. Yay. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear okay? I can hear you. I can hear you.
You can hear me? Okay. I can't hear you, which is the weird part.
I can hear you.
I'm not really sure what happened there, but I will say, I'll read your lips somewhat, but I'm thankful. We've been about an hour, and I'm, obviously, this is very personal for me, right? And I'm over the moon, and that we could have this conversation and we could have this awareness out. Like I said, I had a lot of people reach out. I know there's a couple people from Australia who are really looking forward to watching this later. Obviously, the time zone is very different, very interesting. But thank you. I am so appreciative, and I will thank you again when I can hear you, since for some reason working on my computer or working via my phone has kind of made this strange. But I will let Chris say some things eventually, so to make it work. But check out the International OCD Foundation. It really is what led me to reach out today to talk to you and learn more, especially for anyone who's just curious. I think it is helpful. I'll let you say goodbye, and then thank you again, Chris. I appreciate it.
Well, I want to say thank you so much to you, Tina. I mean, I really appreciate you opening up. I didn't know, until you sent that email that you had gone through it, and it made this so much more of a comfortable experience. And I know it's not easy to open up and to share about your personal experience. As somebody who does it a lot, it's still sometimes overwhelming and nerve-wracking, but just for you to feel comfortable to open up about your mom, I know that's going to really impact people, specifically people who have a parent with OCD and related conditions, really getting help. I want to thank everybody who's watched this and has been in the chat. Like, I really, really appreciate you all joining us today and being so interactive. And I really hope everyone can get the support and help they need. And lastly, I just want to say, my name's Chris Trondsen. You could see it under there. Find me on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. It's just at Chris Trondsen. And so you can DM me or you can private message me if you'd like, and definitely ask any questions. And I'm definitely here to support. Or you can email me. It's my name, Chris Trondsen, as you see there, at gatewayocd.com. So you can absolutely reach out if you have any questions. I'm here to support and offer resources and help as a lead advocate for the International OCD Foundation. So thank you, everyone, for coming out. Thank you, Tina, for making this such an incredible experience. Anything you ever need from me, again, I'll be here. And I really want everybody to know that there's hope out there. There's absolute treatment, and you don't have to suffer alone and in silence. We have a great community for you. So thank you, everybody, so much. And if you're interested to come to our low-cost conference, we also have plenty of scholarships. Go to ocdsocal.org. And also, if you're interested in our free family and loved one support group, that's every second Saturday of the month. So thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. I don't know if Tina can hear.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I couldn't hear everything, but it's funny how you can know reading lips. I was like, he's talking about Instagram. There was Facebook. Nailed it. I'll reach out in an email just to thank you, since I can't hear anything. But thank you so much. And what a crazy coincidence for both Greeks. That was a perfect surprise.
All right, take care, everybody. Thank you so much to the organization and to Tina. I really appreciate it. And please support Punk Rock Saves Lives. Absolutely. Take care.
Thank you.